Thanks for coming to the Locknote panel. This is when we look at some of the themes and some of the interesting things we saw as a review board and talk with you about them. So first I'll introduce myself. I'm not Jeff Moss. I'm Chris Weisopel. If you're in the older half of the room, you might know me as Weld Pond from the Loft back in the 90s. But if you're younger, you might know me as the CTO and co-founder of Veracode. On my left here is Sharon Conhidi. She's the Director of First Defense Information Security and founding member of Risk Avengers, and she specializes in the human side of security. On my right here, I have Andreas Lind, who's a vulnerability researcher and consultant at Recurity Labs. And on the end here, I have Sean Moyer, who is founding partner of Atreides Partners, a research and software security consultancy. So thanks for joining me. So I just want to start off with, I think, we had two very interesting keynotes, very different keynotes that kind of set the stage for a lot of the thinking that I had during the conference. And, Chris Painter came up and really talked about how, what we've all been doing here for many, many years is not just a technical problem. It's now governments are worried it's a political problem. We saw that in the elections. It's a economic problem. It's a international foreign affairs challenge now. And so we have a lot of people in government all trying to figure out what are we going to do with all the cyber risk that's out there and all the cyber actors that are out there. And I think he kind of did a little bit of a call to us to, he wanted to explain what the challenges were and, how as a community, what can we do to help the decision makers understand what's possible? We saw one of the first things they came out with was Wassenaar, and I think people in the research community said, "Hey, wait a minute, this isn't going to work quite right." So we have to have a dialogue with what's going on in the government space so that they don't make things worse, right? So one of the things he talked about was creating cyber norms. And what does that mean? And I just want to kind of open it up to the panel. We have norms in our community. People just sort of behave a certain way, and if they act out, they kind of get some consequences. How can we learn from what we do around cyber risk and the norms in our community? Is there any way we can bring that and help these government policymakers? Anyone? No?
So I actually had kind of a different, and is this on? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So I actually I've always looked at this maybe a little bit differently. When I think about Wassenaar, I think about DMCA, and I think of all of these different attempts we did, in the early days with trying to label encryption as a munition and all of this other stuff. It seems to be about targeting vulnerability researchers, targeting people who have access to payloads and exploits and all these other things. So we go that direction. But the interesting thing to me is that we have all of these regulatory controls around physical technologies, right? Emissions controls over auto manufacturing, all of these other things, but we don't hold software vendors or technology companies to account for building quality products and quality code. So it seems to me kind of backwards that we're always worrying about controlling the disclosure process and all these other things, but nobody ever stops and goes, well, wait a minute, how did Apple ship, how did Intel ship this code, riddled with backdoors that, have been there for years that nobody ever found? And so I don't have an answer by any stretch, but it's something that has always occurred to me is in every other industry, the amount of control and regulation for people's safety that is at play. And when we have things like SCADA and smart grid, and now IoT that have physical consequences from exploitation payloads, it seems like all of these manufacturers that are building and shipping this code are a large part of the problem as well. So, like I say, I don't have an answer for it, but I'm more interested in how can we hold those people to account than I am how do we hold the research community to account.
Andrea, Sharon, do you have any thoughts? What would you tell policymakers if you could to help this new world we're living in where cyber has such a bigger impact?
I think I would just tell them to get the right kind of people involved, and it's so important for us as a community to be involved in all that. And I would feel so reassured personally if I knew that you guys were involved in these discussions. What's worried me recently is a UK MP, for example, tweeted last week that she regularly shares her password with everybody in her office, including foreign interns. Which makes me kind of worried. You know, you've got government people who are responsible for setting these policies, pretending in some cases that they are concerned about cybersecurity, and on the other hand, they're doing these really, really stupid things. So I just really want us as a community to be involved and let them know what they're doing wrong and what the threats are that they're facing, so they get a better understanding of it. And I guess one of the things we need to do then is to explain it to them in terms they understand.
I think this also has to do a lot with that both vendors and us as security people, we don't always have the, we want to do much more than we're allowed to. We're not always given, you know, the right circumstances to do a good job. The same thing with developers who are, you know, constantly told to push code. And so solutions aren't gonna be like built the way that developers want to. They're gonna be built faster. I mean, we've seen this in the IoT space, like where first to market is basically all that matters. So this is something that we need to turn around in some way.
So, you know, there's no incentives for people to do the right thing.
Exactly.
You know, the other flip side is if you do the wrong thing, there are consequences. And I think this is a lot of the way that sometimes, you know, the government people think is, you know, like, look what happened with the Russians in the Winter Olympics. They broke the rules and they got banned from the Winter Olympics. There's consequences for breaking the rules. I just wonder, what are the consequences for breaking the rules in our community or on the international stage? In cyber, it seems like people just get away with whatever.
Yeah, I mean, attribution is hard. Breaking the rules in the Winter Olympics is going to be pretty obvious. In cyber, it's rarely obvious. So that's definitely a problem, which I don't have an answer to. But I guess that's why cyber norms doesn't really exist now.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any thoughts on what Chris was saying or consequences?
Yeah, not really. I did have the thought on the consequences side, right? That, yeah, as I say, I mean, if, you know, to Andreas' point too, like, it's very difficult not only for attribution, but, you know, the same token. So let's say I, as a vulnerability researcher, identify zero-day and also, like, my firm does that all the time, right? Like, we find zero-day in products for the purposes of performing, you know, security research for somebody. And we're sitting on this vulnerability that we identified. We go to our client and say, you know, we found this zero-day in this, you know, firewall or antivirus product or whatever it is. And it's really up to them whether they want to do anything about it or not, because it's their property. We did the engagement and it belongs to them. But at the end of the day, if they don't want to do anything about it and they don't want to get it fixed, it's possible for us to drop that on Pastebin or whatever, and it's going to leak, it's going to come out. And we see that, you know, eventually all of these things, like information wants to be free, right? So all of these things find a way out sooner or later. And there are so many ways to do that without, you know, attribution, without it being mapped back to somebody. But the other side of consequences, again, to go back to, I guess I'm like anti-corporate a little bit, I suppose. I didn't actually realize that till now. But, you know, we talk about, look what happened to Target, or look what happened to, and I apologize for being US-centric, but like, look what happened to Equifax, right? So, you know, the vast majority of American citizens' entire credit histories are out there. Like, it's over. There's nothing we can do. It's just out there. Like, I have friends who bought new vehicles because their VINs are known, you know, like, what do you do? And what are the consequences going to be for an Equifax?
So there were some, right? The CIO and the CEO lost their jobs. The stock is down 20%. Who knows maybe that's just a buying opportunity because we know it'll come back.
Well, and that's
Are there
what-
real, I mean, there's some consequences, but is it enough to deter the next executive team from not caring about security?
Well, and that's where I was actually headed with that, is that there's and I'll have to find who manages it. It's a sort of a pretend index fund called $BRCH, so Breach, and it's a fund that somebody has that is based on all of the firms that were breached, like large companies that were compromised and breached. And so like Equifax is in that index fund now. And the reality is that there's these tiny little dips, and then it just bounces right back. People don't stop, shopping at Target after a big breach. They do for a tiny little moment, and then it just keeps on going. So it doesn't even, people aren't ultimately, there's not really a recourse or a consequence to this stuff that affects corporations in a really clear way. Those executives, still have more money than anybody in this room, I'm sure. Maybe they're going to go into advisory roles and consultancies to those companies that are not sitting on their boards anymore. But they're the same way that the founders of Enron are still doing pretty well for themselves.
In terms of consequences, though, I'd like to think that GDPR might help somewhat towards that. That's a lot of money people are talking about, really hitting them in the wallet where it hurts. So maybe that'll help somewhat.
We'll have to see how that's enforced. That'll be interesting.
Come back next year.
So I want to talk a little bit about Joanna Rutkowska's talk this morning, which I thought was very interesting. Some really kind of interesting different ideas. We talk a lot about minimizing attack surface, the concept of least privilege, and she's really bringing that concept to the concept of trust, which is minimize the things you have to trust, helps build a trustworthy system. And that seems to be the constant problem. Like, we can't trust our hardware. We always find out there's yet another chipset in there with firmware that can be backdoored, or we can't trust software, both because of backdoors and because of the amount of bugs that's put into it. Maybe we can't trust our admins. And then so you look at a lot of the things that people talk about here at Black Hat, and it's all the things that are broken, right, in protocols and things. So, I think there is some merit to trying to, both on the side that you're talking about, Sean, like how can we force people to sort of make more trusted systems, but at the same time, maybe we just need to trust things less. I mean, there's sort of a duality there, and maybe we have to work both sides of the equation. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, one of my main takeaways from this conference was the hardware talks, more specifically the Intel ME talks and the EFI talk. And it's pretty obvious that those kind of subsystems, which are running like highly privileged, if that's compromised, we really have no idea if that has happened. I mean, there's no way for us to actually detect that using like traditional security tools. So I agree with Joanna that, if that's how it's gonna be now, and there is nothing that indicates that it's not gonna be.
So we're gonna like give up on the trusting the hardware?
No, yeah, it's gonna be really hard because there are so many ways. Someone could like compromise the supply chain, or the vendor could add something like Lenovo's Superfish thing, which was like a pure software backdoor. That could have easily been done in hardware, and it would probably not have been found for a very long time. So that's also something. There are so many ways that you can compromise hardware, and it's so hard to find.
I think it's funny. I think back to Joanna's research, years ago with the blue pill stuff as well. In that, at that time it was a really novel kind of notion to say, if you were inside a VM, how do you know that where you are. Are you actually, where is this code actually running? You don't really, like, there's certain fundamentals that we trust at the beginning of a conversation about security, right? And I often end up sounding like the crazy conspiracy theorist. Like, how do you know that the CA trust chain itself is actually valid? But yet we've seen rogue CAs. We've seen numbers of different, high-level compromises at that level of like a Komodo or whomever that meant that the fundamentals of trust that we were trusting SSL, which would, that's always the argument. Well, we've got encryption, we've got PKI, we've got this or that. And then you have to step a layer back from there. And when you get down to, we don't actually know if we trust the boot chain itself, and we don't fundamentally know if we trust the driver firmware that is burned into a device or a mobile devices. Like we gave a talk about this last year, that, mobile devices, people don't really understand that effectively Hexagon is a, your baseband on a mobile device is kind of its own operating system with its own attack service and network services and all of these other things. And your bootloader is effectively an OS. UEFI, is eventually going to, become sentient and create Skynet. Like it does so many things. Like it doesn't even need to do, right? And there's sort of the Moore's law problem. That embedded systems become more and more complex because we have the ability to make them more complex. There's usually not even a good reason other than devs like to write code, and they just continue to write more code. And so you have all of this stuff like the AMT and UEFI that become more and more complex, and we're trusting and presuming that those things give us a trusted computing base from boot time on. And really the only thing defending them is their obscurity, and that's like, obviously with the AMT, that should have been a huge wake-up call for people, that it's not just that those vulnerabilities existed, and the talk, prior to this about, zero-day life cycle and things as well, right? People need to realize that when a zero-day, sort of comes to life from our perspective, there's a long, long tail prior to that, where it's when we say last night, Schrodinger's zero day, like it's in the box, and do we know if it exists or not?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and so it's not the fact that AMT happened or that Apple VNC bug happened. It's the fact that it was there for years, and all of that time that we felt safe and secure using a system that booted off of that hardware, it was insecure and untrustworthy that entire time.
Someone probably knew.
So I want to add just, you mentioned rogue CAs. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not really rogue CAs, but there's quite a number of governments who are actually trusted CAs. And I mean, point. I don't really want to put that kind of trust in like any governments. That's the entirely wrong place for that. So there's a lot of like broken by design here too.
So Sharon, what do you think about the idea of applying some of the concepts of like, not having to trust things to the people side? Like we have to trust our admins, we have to trust our security guards, do we really want to do that? Do we want to trust our users to do the right thing?
Yeah, sure.
How can you apply this to the human part?
I mean, it's a huge challenge for security professionals now. We can't trust our hardware and we can't trust our end users. And I'll tell you what, it takes a lot of energy not to trust anybody. That's really tough. And people generally aren't willing to extend that amount of energy to not trust in each and everybody that they see. So I'm not sure. You've got to find the sweet spot somewhere, that makes each organization reasonably secure, maintaining a healthy level of distrust, but equally being a fun place, a nice place to work, where people actually want to work and enjoy going to work each day. And that is really, really tough.
So, I think, what we saw, you brought up, IME as something that we trusted and we can't trust anymore. And, who knows when the next bug is going to be found in these systems. A lot of the talks that, I saw, like Blueborn and the Alexa, maybe I trust Amazon to auto update their device, but like think of all the IoT devices out there that, you know, have these bugs like Blueborn, or maybe, you know, they're affected by some of the LTE problems out there. You know, we're raising these issues, but like, how is this ever going to get solved?
I mean, to me, the way that I always tend to take these is to go back to first principles. If you look at effectively every security vulnerability somewhere maps back to a poor procedural decision. Effectively, I use the dangerous library, I use the dangerous function, I did something in a, you know, fundamentally this is you know, textbook, poor handling of memory, or you know, this is a classical format string bug. Like we find bugs every day that we give to people that map back to a textbook that they should have read, you know, in school, right? Like these fundamental things that are just principles of good programming practices and procedures, right? And then there are other fundamentals of just good design, right? So building and architecting systems with good security fundamentals and limited attack surface and like all of these things, you have to start finding ways to get that baked in from the outset. And the thing that's interesting is that we've told people for a long time that the answer is security updates. Right? Like if you can get updates, that'll solve it. And now we have these devices, and this is we've been talking about this for years with the smart grid. Like when smart meters, and we talk, you know, the Blueborn stuff. And in reality, is there are plenty of smart meters that talk Bluetooth. There are plenty of you know, smart home devices and AMI related devices that talk Bluetooth. You know, the reality is that the vast majority of those devices in consumer use are designed with a 15-year lifetime. And I've had conversations with utilities where a patch cycle is 3 to 6 months time. You know, that's how long it takes. And eventually the last mile of those that don't get updates properly automatically, you have to drive out and roll trucks out and physically go out there and try to fix these devices.
But we're now building that with smart
Yes.
devices.
Thousands
Because
times 1,000, you know?
all those smart devices have a long lifetime, right?
Yes.
You're not going to change your door locks all the time,
Yep.
or your garage door
Exactly.
opener.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I'd say that they may not be being more consumer centric. Maybe they're not designed with a 15-year lifetime in mind as much as the utilities, you know, build them that way. But I'm sure that 5 and 10-year lifetimes are not unexpected at all.
I have a 10-year-old TV.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I suppose, 5, 10-year-old TV. Of course, probably most people here do that. It's terrifying to me that like you buy a new television now and the first thing it wants to do is like get on your Wi-Fi and update itself. And
So, I mean, can we solve it with some sort of incentives, or do we have to go to regulation and certification of all this stuff? Because, you know, industry doesn't like that. It's going to slow it down and, you know, potentially make it more expensive.
I know what your AdSec co-founder thinks, right? I mean, I think that is the future. I think that something like Cyber UL and certification labs for these things. I mean, as I said before, there are all kinds of regulatory rules around building a piece of electronics that talks, you know, 220 volt AC current. You know, you don't eat paint. Like you can't do these really dumb things with it. I don't know how we enforce that for devices, but I think it's going to come back and bite us.
So I think it is coming though, and the EU Commission has said we're going to certify, you know, ICT. What the scope of that is and what the certification means is up in the air. So, I mean, this is going to be a conversation over the next couple of years, and somehow we have to help them do the right thing.
I also think that we tend to get really, maybe make a bigger fuss than necessary about a lot of things. We talk about IoT like it's like this homogeneous thing, which it isn't. Like your Wi-Fi connected toothbrush getting hacked isn't, you know, really that big a deal. And we tend to like think that
Unless it
everything should apply to everything.
Unless it DDoSes your locks and you can't get in your house.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. Yeah, that's a good point. I take everything back.
It's
No,
a hard one, yeah.
but so what I'm saying is that maybe we should prioritize a little bit better too.
Risk matters.
Yeah, and actually kind of like not just treat IoT as one thing, but actually like have one risk rating for this kind of device and one risk rating for this kind of device.
Yeah, well, and I think that a lot of that, that is where we have a hard time getting our message across to people, because our world, well, and unfortunately, we live in a 24-hour news cycle that's driven, by whatever is headline grabbing and all of that kind of stuff, and this more rational conversation about exactly what risk there is at play, or what the actual consequences of a vulnerability is not nearly as interesting as like a cool demo or a backronym to name the vulnerability so that you can get headlines. And we don't have any kind of way to really convey that to people, and say there is a huge difference between this firmware in a implanted medical device, or as you say, in a toothbrush. And we don't have a simple framework of reference for that. We're still trying to figure out how to define these threats.
It's changing so fast. Yeah. So I think with that, I'd like to open it up to some, questions from the audience. We'd like to hear, your thoughts. What did you think was interesting at the conference, or what you have a question for the panel about what we thought about something? Anyone have a question?
If not, we get to ask you one.
Oh, there's one right in the front. Okay.
Oh, that's sorry.
This on? Thanks for coming, guys. So when I was down in the center where all the vendors were, a lot of different vendors had AI solutions, whether it was AI protecting applications or networks. This word was kind of like loosely thrown around, and I don't know. You guys seem to have a lot more expertise in this. I just wanted to get your take on like, what does it mean when somebody says AI and neural networks to you, and what questions would you want to ask a vendor? Because right now it's very fuzzy whether AI is an Access database that I'm just querying, or whether AI is neural networks with fiber. It's just very fuzzy what they mean, and what are some good questions we can ask vendors to really understand what that means to them.
I have a more general observation of that, of the whole AI, machine learning. Those are not the same thing, but it tends to be bundled. I think we're running the risk of like that sort of technology becoming the next antivirus, which is like no one is gonna know how it actually works, but you're gonna buy something from someone, and you're gonna put it in your data center, and it's gonna do all sorts of stuff that you have no idea about, which is what antivirus was for a very, very long time. And that is kind of, there is a lot of like AI research, and we had some pretty interesting submissions on that too, but it's nowhere near where you can go and like see a talk on it and then take something with you home and start applying it. It's like that whole area of technology needs much more like transparency to be interesting, like to be taken seriously.
So is that what you'd say to the vendor? Is like, tell me actually what's going on here. Don't just say it's.
Show me your
show me the work.
algorithms, or go home.
Yeah, I just unsurprisingly, my take on this is a little bit cynical, but the thing that I will sometimes get my tinfoil hat on and say, like the birth of the antivirus industry, the patron saint is the good gentleman John McAfee, who some of you actually know your history, know invented a virus to create headlines and get everyone to buy his product. Was it the Mona Lisa? Is that right? Something like that, or Michelangelo? But yeah, went on the went on the news and told everyone it's going to be this terrible virus, and it's that kind of ambulance chasing and that kind of just. I've tried to be more diplomatic than I want to be. This entire, the entire information security product industry is really about, by and large, about selling a simple solution to a complex problem, and telling people that they can take something that should be a human problem that requires really smart people like the people in this room to solve, and telling them instead of hiring those really smart people to solve these hard problems, they can spend that same amount of money on a product, which is easier. You don't have to feed it or give it healthcare or anything else. But the reality is that so many corporations I talk to spend more on security products than they do on their team, and the products don't make them any safer. Like, and I swear I'll keep it short, but I did a red team once of a healthcare organization, and it resulted in mass compromise as part of this red team. And as part of the outbrief, they said, "Do you think that antivirus and intrusion detection technology would be helpful?" And I said, "Well, it could. I mean, you need people to look at the logs on your IDS and read them and things, but it's a good start. What kind of IDS do you have?" And they said, "Well, we have Snort," and this is not a diss on SourceFire. I like those guys; they make a nice product. They said, "Well, we have SourceFire, and that's what we're using." And I said, "Well, what model do you have? Let's take a look at your data." And they took me into a room and they showed me a box or a stack of boxes that were IDS appliances that they bought 2 years ago that were now expired and out of support and no longer, that they'd never installed because they didn't have anyone to install them. But they went to a vendor expo somewhere and got convinced that machine learning or artificial intelligence or something or other was going to make them safer instead of having smart people to look at their logs. So AI and all these things are great as a tool, but they're only as smart as the person who has the tool. I guess that's my larger point.
I think it's really been plugged as something that can help with the massive skills shortage that we're facing at the moment as well. Yeah. So it's a real marketing buzzword when it comes to that, but we still absolutely need the people to run all these tools.
Yeah. Investing in an intern program with a local university would probably get you more return on your investment than buying security products. I'll take.
So other questions?
Oh, and this gentleman had one in this one.
Right. Well, I guess there's one back there.
Hello. Hey.
They don't like you, sir. I'm sorry.
So on the first day of the conference, I went to the Diameter talk, which is the successor to SS7 for LTE and 4G networks. And I was surprised to hear that new protocol has all the same issues like SS7, but potentially some new ones because it's a new system. And to me, it would appear that a root cause of many of the compromises we see is actually like complexity. These protocols are very complex and have a huge attack surface. But I also don't see a culture shift. Like we still design, new protocols of the same complexity, of the same attack surface. We don't make an effort in breaking them down or compartmentalizing them in any way. So, how can this be changed, or how can we bring change about in this aspect?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer, right? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When you get a group of engineers in a room and ask them to solve a problem and make it more simple than the current approach to that problem, you don't typically get that, right? Mm-hmm. So, and we have this fundamental culture of technology that we keep adding and creating more and more complexity to these things, and then the simplest security controls are the simplest to enforce and monitor, and again, like first principles, like I say.
And there's also the legacy issue, because even if you start designing your IoT products in a much simpler way and actually reducing the attack surface, it's still going to run on Linux, and you still got the complexity of Linux to deal with. So, and that's what Blueborn pretty much, that's where the impact of that is going to be, because there are so many systems running Linux, so attacks on that are going to scale pretty pretty well.
Good question up front here.
Yeah, this is the first person to raise his hand, and he's been waiting patiently all this time. So, I hope it's a good question. No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah.
Okay, I think everybody in this room knows that patching is at least one of the very important keys, right? It puzzles me a little bit that we have regulations if people are selling, let's call it IoT devices, that they should not be hazardous to the user. They should not give. There should be no possibility that a user can get an electrical shock, for example, or it should not emit electromagnetic radiation so that it disturbs other devices. But there's no regulation telling that there should be some kind of patch model at all. And it doesn't only hold for IoT devices. You can also look at the microcode in each of the components within a computer. I don't even know how many different micro pieces of microcodes and controllers you have. And some of them, they cannot really be patched because the manufacturer didn't implement any kind of patch model. How comes?
I think we're back to the, like, somebody's got to make money on it also. So you got to ship things fast, and so you do what's necessary to ship something, and you don't really implement all the other things. But I definitely think that's I mean, it's definitely something that you should expect from a device. I'd also like to point out that even when a patch model exists, it doesn't always work, as the Apple EFI talk showed. That it's actually just you get the patch, and if it's not installed correctly, then nothing happens. You just go on running your vulnerable EFI, and you don't even know that. So that's also an issue. Like, are people actually building like patch models that work?
Plus, I think, are consumers willing to pay for that? Do they want to pay £10 or $10 for something with a patch model, or do they want to pay $5 for something without? And we have yet to see what the answer to that is.
I mean, I was, if any of you have ever been on an airplane and had someone ask what you do for a living, right? Like you usually try to mumble, or a friend of mine says, just tell them you're an accountant, and then they won't ask any more questions. Works pretty good.
Yeah, you look like an accountant.
Just nice. I'm getting old, just have to be a businessman now. The thing that I get asked when I talk about all this stuff, right, is by the end of it, people, I tell them what I do, and by the end, they're just, they go through the 7 stages of grief, as I explain to them how bad things are and everything, and they say, well, what are you going to do, or what's the problem, what's the root of it? And I say, who do you think has more fire-resistant and earthquake-resistant, buildings, like Tokyo, or Shenzhen, right? And so the difference is that emerging and developing cultures, in the level of like pollution, of course, that we get from the developing world, right? All of those things don't matter until a building falls on someone, and then people care about building codes, right? But up to that point, they just want to keep building, just keep going faster and faster. And so that's kind of what the digital world is still. Is, and Shenzhen's, of course, the capital of the digital world to some extent. And these things are just like those skyscrapers are going up, these chips are going in the same way. And one of these days, one of those is just going to fall over on us. And when that happens, then we're going to start talking about building codes. I mean, how did we come up with all of that in the physical world? Because of fires and because of, roofs collapsing and all of these things that had fundamental physical consequences. And our reliance on systems is going to mean the same thing. It's going to have those consequences someday.
But then the fire thing wasn't, one building burnt down. It was the whole city burnt down because one building caught another on fire, and all of Chicago basically burnt burnt down, and they said, well, wait a minute, this is bad.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
when's it gonna get
we
there?
just haven't had, I mean, I think the Mirai botnet kind of showed how a whole bunch of different devices together that were compromised could take down, it took down, DNS providers. And showed that it could take down large portions of the internet.
Or
it
let's
just
say-
wasn't bad enough, you think?
Let's say
came back in a few
democracy.
days.
Let's say maybe a democracy,
Yeah.
right? At some point, when do we take notice? I don't know.
I mean, we've had events at that scale before, like the sequel Slammer
Right.
was on that magnitude, and that did pretty much nothing.
So I would actually, well, it was more like a series, I'll say that, right? That's cynical, but it was a series of fires, right? So, and you were, of course, really at the
Blaster and all these
Blaster,
things in the early
Welchia,
2000s.
NIMDA. And so it got to the point where enough of those happened that ultimately was, at that time, the largest footprint of anything was Microsoft. And so that was what caused the transformative, the Halloween memos and all these things at MS, where they turned a corner. And now we have all of these other companies that are going to have to go through that same process at some point of coming to grips with it.
So I think I saw another question over here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
I got
okay.
it as well. Regarding the fires and stuff, we already know that vital infrastructure is also in a pretty bad shape. Realistically, how long would you expect it to take for someone to actually destroy a facility? It's already happened once with Stuxnet, but vital infrastructure is getting worse every day.
So there was, if in the United States, there was a event that caused a large rolling blackout in Los Angeles that related to a specific substation. It's a very strange deal. We still don't know exactly what happened, but apologies for the prevalence of firearms in my country, but a group of people showed up at a plant at a substation that had a bunch of large transformers and took all of them out with assault rifles, and it caused rolling blackouts throughout Los Angeles. For a period of 24, 36 hours, major disruption of infrastructure. It's the most. It was the most significant sort of cyber attack that's happened on that continent, and in reality, it was firearms that caused it, but there was a lot of foreknowledge of how the systems work that made it possible to take advantage of that, right? The more connected those systems are, eventually you can do that type of thing without having to be there physically, right? But it was cascading failures that caused that, Yeah, I don't have an answer. Yes, it's bad. It's coming at some point, frankly.
I also submitted one of the papers for today. Didn't make it, sadly. I'm curious how long it will take. Let's leave it at that.
Just to say on behalf of the review board too, please submit to Black Hat Asia and US and everything too.
In US, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else, just to say that, because we're sitting up here, right? I mean, the reality is that sometimes it's just luck of the draw. I get asked those kind of questions all the time, and there are great talks that don't make it in.
Yeah.
And there are terrible talks that do make it in sometimes. It's just
No, come on.
no, that never happens.
We don't. We guard against that.
But we do a lot of things to prevent that. But there are sometimes, I tell a lot of people, you might have had a great idea, but there might have been two that were very similar to that vein, and we have to make a decision on the audience or whatever. Yeah. So please keep submitting.
Cool.
If you're really bad, we'll tell you. So we'll tell you to stop. If we don't tell you to stop, keep submitting.
So unfortunately with that, we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for coming to Black Hat, and I hope you really enjoyed it, and give us some feedback, what you liked. And please join me giving a round of applause to our panel here.